We say United Utilities and that starts happening.
So this is treated effluent?
This is treated sewage.
We put our camera in the water. This is what legal treated effluent looks like. 1.1 million litres can be discharged from this spot every day.
The big difference that we want to make as a campaign, it's not just the untreated that's causing the issue, it's also the treated sewage that comes from United Utilities. And the only way to protect Windermere, protect local businesses, protect the environment and the culture and the economy of the area is to stop putting it into the lake.
That would require a very long pipe that effectively bypassed the lake and would come with a multi-million-pound price tag. United Utilities said in a statement, "Our wastewater treatment works are sized to treat the sewage from maximum population numbers at peak times and use the highest treatment standards, including phosphorus removal and UV treatment to kill bacteria."
This is new, I haven't seen this one before.
So what now? Barney Cunliffe owns a Michelin-starred restaurant near the lake. If, as the research suggests, tourists are at least part of the problem, should there be limits on visitors?
We can't be told, oh, you've got to stop growing because our waste isn't being treated properly. We've paid for that waste to be treated. We deserve to have that infrastructure in place to enable us to grow sustainably.
There are solutions that will make our seas, rivers and lakes like Windermere cleaner. But they're expensive, and the water companies are very clear that it's customers who must pay for them through higher bills. Jonah Fisher, BBC News, in the Lake District.
Time for a look at the weather picture now. Here's Matt Taylor.
Hello, at long last, a little bit of welcome news in the forecast for the rest of this week after what has been a particularly wet spell for some southern and eastern areas. The Isle of Portland in Dorset have already exceeded our main rainfall in the first 7 days. Contrast that with Kinloss and the Murray Coast, where we've not seen a drop of rain recorded yet. We'll switch things around a little bit through this week, and where we need a bit of rain, the north and west of Scotland, there will be some at times. Still some dry weather here and warm with the sunshine out later, but where we've seen the wettest conditions, a largely dry picture, only isolated showers and feeling warm as the sunshine develops more widely. And even today, an improving picture. The weather front, which brought the rain in the southeast, is cleared through. One weather front, though, still tangled in across parts of Scotland, producing lots of cloud and a few spots of light rain or drizzle. A few light showers possible across western England and Wales, but nowhere near as many or as widespread as yesterday, or indeed as heavy. And it does mean that more of you will spend the bulk of the day dry, if not the complete day dry. And temperatures responding into the high teens, if not low 20s. Always cooler where that thicker cloud is in parts of Scotland. That'll be there tonight. Fairly cloudy in Northern Ireland too for a while. A few mist and fog patches possible, but low cloud and sea fog will lap into eastern parts of England and around western coast of Wales, north coast of Devon and Cornwall too, to make for a murky start tomorrow. But temperatures fairly similar to this morning. Now, to go into Wednesday, middle part of the week, that high pressure, which is going to bring the dry conditions, becomes more established to the south and east. Weather fronts, though, scooting round that just to the north and west, which is going to bring some rain later on across the Western Isles, northern and western Scotland, and into the evening, maybe across some parts of Northern Ireland. On the odd isolated shower across some western areas, most places, though, having a dry day on Wednesday, and with a little bit more sunshine around after that murky start. Temperatures will be more widely high teens and low 20s. As you go through into Thursday, overnight patchy rain or drizzle, Northern Ireland clears. Still a bit damp in the far north of Scotland. Many they'll have a dry day. Very few, if any, showers around at all for most of you, and a lot more sunshine. So we could see temperatures by this stage 22 or 23 and creeping into the low 20s in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And they will climb further as we go through towards the end of the week and into the start of the weekend, with most dry until we see some showers develop on Sunday. Take care.
Travelling can be so much more than a holiday.
It's about diving headfirst into new experiences.
And seeing the world with fresh eyes.
Where each destination tells a unique story.
And every encounter brings a new perspective.
Because all of these amazing places
are made so much richer by the people who live in them.
So unleash your spirit of adventure.
And join us for a deeper understanding of the world.
The Travel Show. Watch on BBC iPlayer. Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel claims control of the Gazan side of the Rafah crossing as ceasefire talks are set to resume in Cairo. Vladimir Putin is sworn in as Russia's president for a fifth time. That extends his quarter-of-a-century rule over Russia by another 6 years. Personal information of serving UK military personnel has been compromised in a hack. China is suspected of being behind the attack. These are live pictures from Rafah, where thousands of people are on the move. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. Let's start today in the Middle East, where Israel's army says it has seized Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt after continuously bombarding eastern Rafah overnight. These images have been issued by the Israel Defense Forces and show tanks moving in on the area. Now remember, this is a vital entry point for aid, and it comes a day after Israel ordered civilians to evacuate the area. The IDF says it has operational control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing. Aid agencies are saying this could be disastrous for those civilians caught up in the conflict. You can see in these pictures lorries, these are trucks, hundreds of them, queuing up at the Rafah crossing. They are waiting to get into Gaza. And the UN says any delay in getting fuel into the strip puts their Gaza operation in its grave. There was a brief glimmer of hope yesterday. These were scenes outside the Al-Aqsa hospital as Palestinians celebrated news that Hamas had accepted a ceasefire deal. This was rejected, though, by Israel as far from meeting its core demands. And instead, the country's war cabinet voted to continue operations in Rafah. We know talks will resume in Cairo. Israel is sending a delegation to those talks. Let's take you to our Middle East Bureau Chief Joe Floto, who joins us now from Jerusalem, and to Cairo to join the BBC's Abdul Basir Hassan. Good to see you both. Joe, can I start with you? What do we know is happening on the ground in Rafah at the moment?
So at the moment, we understand that the Israeli military are still in control of that area of Rafah. They've moved tanks in to take control of the border crossing and areas around it. And we're told that special forces are combing the area looking for what the IDF call terrorist infrastructure. They told us that they had killed around 20 Hamas members overnight and this morning, and had discovered 3 tunnels. And it's the tunnels, I think, that is the key to why the military wants to get into this area of Gaza. They've long suspected that this is the entry point for weaponry to supply Hamas and other militant groups. And I think as this conflict inevitably comes closer to the end, they wanted to assure themselves that they had some control and could destroy some of that infrastructure.
What is the terms of this current deal, Joe, that it is that Israel objects to?
So look, there have been some copies of what we think is the proposed deal circulating in Arabic on social media. It's a very detailed 3-phase proposal that sees the exchange of prisoners in return for the exchange of hostages, for the partial, gradual, phased and then ultimately total withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. There are several things within that draft, if it's accurate, where Israel would have a problem. Partially, firstly, it's this withdrawal of the military in return for what exactly? And there's no mention of who runs Gaza after this whole process. So I think for Israel, the difficulty of signing up to something that is, albeit phased, gradual, but will end up with a permanent ceasefire in the words of this draft, is problematic because it cannot allow, in its mind, Hamas to still be in charge at the end of it.
Abdul Basir, we know that Israel is sending a delegation to Cairo. What are we expecting to happen in the Egyptian capital today, and what is Hamas saying?
The Rafah operation yesterday night maybe have cast some light on the possible or planned negotiations in Cairo. So far in Cairo, we can't confirm that delegations has arrived or have arrived from Qatar or Israel or even Hamas. We can't confirm this until it's midday in Cairo. I've been in contact to try to confirm whether they arrived or not. I couldn't get any answers. What is being or could be discussed in Cairo is more pressure in both sides to try to reach a deal, especially in light of the latest developments at the borders with Egypt. Egypt does not want any an overall operation or avoidant operation at the borders. Of course, it had warned against the consequences of raiding Rafah or an extensive operation there. Qatar as well does not want any enlargement of the conflict, as well as many key and regional players as well. What's expected here, we cannot expect what's going to be discussed, but what's being offered, as my colleague have just said, that there are a multi-phase plan which has been rejected by Israel, but Israel said it will send a delegation. What we have learned is that by seizing the Palestinian part of Rafah crossing, Israel might try to impose new conditions on the deal in Cairo by trying to get rid of any rule of Hamas at the crossing or the aid coming to Gaza. This is one thing. And of course, we have learned that there could be some sort of pre-information coming to Egypt like 1 or 2 days ago from Israel, saying that they are going to come to the borders. Therefore, so far, Egypt is still trying to exercise some sort of self-restraint in terms of any response to the Israeli actions on the borders, with hopes that this can be contained in the planned negotiations or discussions in Cairo.
Joe, in a moment we're going to be talking to the UN, who are in Rafah, to get a sense of what the humanitarian needs are, the huge concern that aid agencies have. But line has just broken from the Palestinian Authority, calling on the US to immediately intervene. Can you explain the pressures at the moment on Benjamin Netanyahu from not just the US, but also domestically?
Look, there's a lot of pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister, and the UN is correct to point out that the aid flowing into Gaza mainly flows through the Rafah crossing and the nearby Kerem Shalom crossing, which is currently closed because it's being mortared. But for the Prime Minister in Israel, well, he has several aspects of pressure. Firstly, the hostage families and their supporters who've been out on the streets in several cities across Israel demanding that the Israeli government should do a deal, because their priority should be the release of whoever the hostages are who remain alive and the return of the bodies of those who are dead. Now, within Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, he has two far-right politicians, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is the finance minister, and both of those have said that any capitulation to Hamas, anything that is short of a total defeat, would be something that they can't support. And if they can't support it, this coalition collapses. So there is pressure there on Netanyahu, but of course he spoke to the American President Joe Biden yesterday afternoon, and Joe Biden is very keen indeed for hostages, some of whom have got US passports, to be released, and for this conflict as a whole to wind up.
Joe Abdulbasir, thank you so much. We can actually now take you live to Rafah in southern Gaza and speak to Sam Rose, who is Director of Planning at UNRWA. That's the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. He's just a couple of miles west of the evacuation zone that's been laid out by the IDF in Rafah. Sam, really good that we've made contact with you, and thank you for joining us. What are you hearing from your people out there in Rafah at the moment, with the IDF saying they're in control of the Gazan side of Rafah? What does that look like where you are?
I mean, it looks desperate and it feels desperate. The situation here is very intense. The eastern part of Rafah subjected to intense bombing over the past 24 hours. The streets are now clogged with people who are on the move. These are people inside the evacuation zone. From inside that zone, there are 100,000 people there, but also people on the outside of it, people who've been displaced many, many times already, some of whom have taken the decision to move early and to move now. So really, really difficult conditions on the ground inside Rafah.
Yeah, and Sam, I heard one of your colleagues say earlier today that if they can't get fuel in to Rafah, into Gaza at the moment, that puts their operation in the grave, was what they said. Can you explain whether or not you've got enough fuel for the next couple of days and what's happening at the border? Is anything getting in?
Absolutely. I mean, the border has been closed since Sunday, so nothing has come in since Sunday. And we've been living hand to mouth in Gaza since October. Actually, the people here have been living hand to mouth since 2007 when the blockade came in place. But the closure of Rafah, Kerem Shalom, as your correspondent said, the main entry point, the lifeline for what it's worth for people inside Gaza has been cut off. So nothing is coming in. We currently have fuel for about half a day's worth of operations. We can ration that to a certain extent, but there's no other way around it. Unless additional fuel comes in, then operations will grind to a halt in the coming days. And I'm not just talking here about commodities, about trucks, driving those around the border. They're not coming in. Fuel is the basis for everything inside Gaza. There's no power plant. There are no proper water services. The fuel powers the water lines. It enables our health centers to keep running. It enables the hospitals providing life-saving care to keep running. If that fuel runs out, then everything grinds to a halt.
And Sam, what about all those people who have been told to evacuate, some of whom are actually on the move now? What's their situation like? Where are they going?
I mean, the situation is absolutely terrible. I mean, there's 100,000 people inside that area. Half of those people are children, but the population of Rafah is 1.5 million people. Most of them have been evacuated and displaced many times already during this conflict. And there is nowhere safe for them to go to. The so-called safe zone cannot fit any more people. The other half of the safe zone is in a sand dune, which can't accommodate people for any length of time. The other half is inside Khan Yunis, which has been subject to savage bombardment over the past several weeks. So there really is nowhere for these people to go, and there's no way that we as the humanitarian community can really support them when they're there for any duration of time, unless these borders and the crossing points reopen for commodities and for fuel.
Sam, thanks so much for joining us. A difficult couple of days ahead, of course, for you, as it has been already. Thank you so much, Sam Rose in Rafah. Lots going on the ground, also diplomatically as well, with those talks restarting in Cairo. You can follow all the latest on what is happening, the situation, the response in Israel too, on the BBC News app and website. We've got a live page right now. It's up and running. All the developments there as they happen. Do log on and take a look. President Putin has been sworn in for a new 6-year term at a ceremony at the Kremlin. Putin, who has been in power as president or prime minister since 1999, now begins his new mandate more than 2 years after he sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine. In March, he won a landslide victory in a tightly controlled election from which 2 anti-war candidates were barred on technical grounds. Britain, Canada and most European Union nations decided to boycott the swearing-in. France said it would send its ambassador. Coming up a little later in the programme, we're going to hear from champion runner Eliud Kipchoge. He's told the BBC he feared for the lives of his family after a campaign of online abuse wrongly linked him to the death of a fellow Kenyan marathon runner. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. The Chinese president is continuing his visit to France today. Xi Jinping has flown to the Pyrenees Mountains. He's meeting with President Macron and they're going to go on to have lunch in the mountains where Mr. Macron's grandmother was born. It's expected that he'll continue to press President Xi to end the sale of dual-use goods to Russia and to also accept fair trade arrangements. He'll then travel on, Mr. Xi, to Serbia, where China has invested billions of dollars in steel and mining companies. A visit there we will keep across for you, particularly after they've had lunch in the Pyrenees. We're expecting some nice pictures from the mountains of France and we will share those with you. But let's get some of the day's other news now. An Australian woman has formally pleaded not guilty to the murder of 3 relatives who allegedly died over mushroom poisoning at a family lunch last year. Erin Patterson is facing 3 murder charges and 5 counts of attempted murder. Police allege she tried to kill her ex-husband on 3 other occasions. Ms Patterson has always maintained her innocence. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is accusing China of unacceptable conduct. It follows reports that a Chinese fighter jet fired flares into the flight path of an Australian Navy helicopter on Saturday. The helicopter was flying across the Yellow Sea as part of UN efforts to enforce sanctions on North Korea. Mr Albanese said Canberra had made clear to Beijing its displeasure over this incident, but had yet to receive a response. And scientists have found that people who have a specific genetic trait are almost certain to develop Alzheimer's disease. A study in Spain discovered that 95% of those who are over 65 and carry 2 copies of what's known as the APOE4 gene are likely to be affected and show early symptoms. Let's turn to Kenya, where the 2-time Olympic champion Eliud Kipchoge says he feared for the lives of his family during a campaign of online abuse. The athlete said that he was wrongly linked to the death of fellow Kenyan marathon runner Kelvin Kiptum in February. He's been calling for social media companies to do more to clamp down on abuse on their platforms. Let's have a listen to Mr Kipchoge speaking exclusively to the BBC about his experience.
All people online, also social media platforms are saying that Eliud is involved actually in the death of this boy. So that was my worst news ever in my life. I received a lot of bad things that they will ban the camp, they will ban my investments in town, they will ban my house.
Real fears for his family there from Eliud Kipchoge. Let's speak to our BBC Sport Africa reporter, Celestine Carioni, who interviewed Mr Kipchoge. It was such a candid interview, Celestine, that he gave you, and you visited him at his training camp near Nairobi. Tell us more about what he's been through.
Well, he has been through quite a lot, and it was very interesting, Lucy, to see him very vulnerable. You know, this is a man that we know from the slogan, no human is limited. So he has this superhuman invincibility aura around him. But Eliud was very vulnerable, and it was such a, heart-to-heart conversation. He really spoke about the impact that it has had on his family. He talked to us, Lucy, about how his children usually bike to school. But because of the abuse that he was receiving online, he was very fearful that, they might be harmed on the way to school. So he had to change that, to take measures to drop them and pick them from school. He also talked about his mother, his mother. He called his mother, and he was shocked for his mother telling him that she knew about what he has been going through. And he broke down at that moment and really was very emotional about that, said, look, he's from a very remote area and he didn't realize the reach of social media. So he was very fearful, not just for his life, but for the life of his family as well, and talked about how he lost 90% of his friends because some of those close to him were propagating the lies that were being, distributed online, that he was involved in the death of Kelvin Kiptum, the man who broke his world record. So it was such a difficult few months for Eliud Kipchoge after the death of Kelvin Kiptum.
Celestine, how did it affect his performance?
Well, it really did have an impact on his performance. Now, a few weeks later, on the 3rd of March, Eliud Kipchoge competed in the Tokyo Marathon. And now, this is what he was seeing as his build-up to the Olympic Games. But he came 10th in that race. Now, That is significant because 10th is the worst performance Eliud Kipchoge has ever had in the marathon. And he told us that for 3 days leading up to the competition, he did not sleep. He could not sleep because of everything that was going on. His team had blocked him from social media so that he could not see these messages, but it was still weighing down on his mind. So mentally, he was not in that place where he could compete, and it had a massive impact on his race in Tokyo, Lucy.
And what is he now calling for, Celestine? What does he want to happen?
So he's talking about how he feels online companies do not do enough in protecting people who are trolled online. He actually said not just famous people like he is, but anyone who's trolled online. He feels that when you report an account that is trolling you, it's not brought down fast enough. So he wants to see speed in action from these companies that run this platform so that they can protect people who are being abused or trolled or bullied online. Lucy.
Celestine, a great interview. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you in Nairobi. Let's take you to India now. The third round of voting is taking place today in the general election. 11 states and territories go to the polls, from Assam to the east, Gujarat in the west, Bihar in the north, Goa in the south. Prime Minister Narendra Modi voted early on Tuesday, walking out of a polling booth in the city of Ahmedabad while holding up a finger. Now, it is always marked with indelible ink. It's a popular photo that people share on social media too. And he was flanked by security personnel and cheered on by his supporters. So all of India there watching him vote. The world's most populous nation began voting back on April the 19th. It is a 7-phase election in which nearly 1 billion people are eligible to vote. Personal information about serving members of the UK Armed Forces has been accessed from a system used by the Ministry of Defence. Government officials have told the BBC China is the most likely country responsible. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian dismissed that accusation.
Relevant remarks of the UK politicians are absurd. China firmly opposes and fights all forms of cyber attacks. We also firmly reject using the cybersecurity issue politically to smear and vilify other countries.
With me is our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera. Gordon, this is a really significant data breach. What's happened?
Well, it is for those who are affected. I mean, you hear about this happening to other organisations sometimes, that personal details have been stolen, things like names, addresses, bank details. But obviously for the military, there is an extra layer of sensitivity. And we're talking here about serving military, reservists, some veterans as well. What's not clear is how much has actually been taken. There was a breach of the contractor who looked after payment details for these members of the military. The hackers got into the systems. Not yet clear what they took out. This was only really discovered and investigated last week, so the investigation is in early stages.
So we don't know what the data's been used for yet?
We don't know what the data's been used for. So far, we haven't yet had any reports that people have been posing as members of the armed forces or taking things from their account, which might suggest it was criminal, but the suggestion is this is more likely to be nation state, if you like, espionage. So I think that it is clearly embarrassing for the military and the government to have people who are serving in the armed forces to have their data taken and potentially used in some way.
Why is the finger being pointed at China?
Well, it is interesting because it is early days and we haven't had an official accusation against China. I think we should be clear about that. There is a process which is called attribution, which the government does, where it says, we've looked at this incident and we think it was China. Now, that can often take time. So, for instance, there was a breach of the UK's Electoral Commission, which happened about 3 years ago and has only just been attributed to China. So that's how long it sometimes takes to publicly blame another country for something like that, because they want to be absolutely sure. So we have not had that public attribution of blame, and we may not get it for some time. So there is an assumption, a suspicion from officials that this was indeed China, partly because of Chinese behaviour in the past, because there have been these incidents where they've been going after this kind of data set.
And just briefly, Gordon, has the MOD managed to notify everyone who may have been affected by this?
Well, that's just happened today. Even though they actually knew about this last week, it seems like only today did that email go out to all those affected, basically saying to them, this has potentially happened to you, you need to be aware, potentially offering them data monitoring, credit monitoring kind of facilities so that they can look into it and trying to reassure them. But clearly there will be concern.
Gordon, thank you. Hamza Youssef has formally resigned now as Scotland's First Minister. Mr Youssef signed his letter to King Charles at the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood. He will make a speech later ahead of a vote to choose his replacement, who is expected to be the new SNP leader, John Swinney. Let's just take you back to the live pictures that we have at the moment from Rafah, our top story here on BBC News, as we're keeping across Israeli military action there. The IDF saying it has operational control now of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing. We're also watching in Cairo the talks that are getting underway again today. Israel has sent a delegation there. Hamas saying it is accepting a ceasefire, a deal that has been put out by Egypt, but Israel is rejecting that. And as always, we are closely looking at the humanitarian situation there. Just speaking to the UN a few minutes ago, they are hugely concerned about the fact that the Rafah crossing is closed, that they can't get fuel or aid into Gaza at the moment, and that means nothing is operational there. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello, at long last, a little bit of welcome news in the forecast for the rest of this week after what has been a particularly wet spell for some southern and eastern areas. The Isle of Portland in Dorset have already exceeded our main rainfall in the first 7 days. Contrast that with Kinloss and the Murray Coast, where we've not seen a drop of rain recorded yet. We'll switch things around a little bit through this week, and where we need a bit of rain, the north and west of Scotland, there will be some at times. Still some dry weather here, and warm with the sunshine out later, but where we've seen the wettest conditions, a largely dry picture, only isolated showers and feeling warm as the sunshine develops more widely. And even today, an improving picture. The weather front, which brought the rain in the southeast, has cleared through. One weather front, though, still tangled in across parts of Scotland, producing lots of cloud and a few spots of light rain or drizzle. A few light showers possible across western England and Wales, but nowhere near as many or as widespread as yesterday, or indeed as heavy. And it does mean that more of you will spend the bulk of the day dry, if not the complete day dry. And temperatures responding into the high teens, if not low 20s. Always cooler where that thicker cloud is in parts of Scotland. That'll be there tonight. Fairly cloudy in Northern Ireland too for a while. A few mist and fog patches possible, but low cloud and sea fog will lap into eastern parts of England and around western coast of Wales, north coast of Devon and Cornwall too, to make for a murky start tomorrow. But temperatures fairly similar to this morning. Now, to go into Wednesday, middle part of the week, that high pressure, which is going to bring the dry conditions, becomes more established to the south and east. Weather fronts, though, scooting round that just to the north and west, which is going to bring some rain later on across the Western Isles, northern and western Scotland, and into the evening, maybe across some parts of Northern Ireland. Only odd isolated shower across some western areas. Most places, though, having a dry day on Wednesday, and with a little bit more sunshine around after that murky start. Temperatures will be more widely high teens and low 20s. As you go through into Thursday, overnight patchy rain or drizzle, Northern Ireland clears. Still a bit damp in the far north of Scotland. Many will have a dry day. Very few, if any, showers around at all for most of you, and a lot more sunshine. So we could see temperatures by this stage 22 or 23 and creeping into low 20s in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And they will climb further as we go through towards the end of the week and into the start of the weekend, with most dry until we see some showers develop on Sunday. Take care.
The art of good conversation is to say the right thing at the right time and in the right way. You have to be original, sympathetic, encouraging, and also keep an open mind. And you really do just need to sit back and listen.
Catty Kay chats with prominent names from the worlds of business, science, and culture.
Influential with me, Catty Kay. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is the context.
The Context, weeknights from 8 p.m. on BBC News and iPlayer.
I see myself in the girls that we're fighting for.
Climate change is real, and we must act now.
Argument is less powerful than emotion, and negative emotion is more powerful than positive emotion.
More than anything else, when we have more feminist storytellers, things will change.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
The headlines here on BBC News. Israel claims control of the Gazan side of the Rafah crossing as ceasefire talks are set to resume in Cairo. Rescuers work to free over 50 construction workers who are trapped under a collapsed building in South Africa. And floral extravagance on the red carpet as stars attend the Met Gala in New York. Let's return to the Middle East. We can show you the live pictures that we're getting right now from Rafah. The Israeli military has crossed into southern Gaza, taking control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. This incursion coming overnight after Israel did say it would continue its military operations in Rafah. Diplomatically, Hamas has said it accepted a Gaza ceasefire proposal that had been put forward by the Qataris and the Egyptians as well. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, saying this proposal did not meet Israel's demands, but he did say that he would send a delegation to Cairo. So while we look at these live pictures coming to us from Rafah, you can see the smoke in the air. Think of the hundreds of people who are on the move there, the fact that the border is closed, aid and fuel is not getting in. We are also going to keep a close eye on those talks in Cairo, and any developments from there, we will bring them to you. But let's look at now about what we know about this operation, what has been happening on the border between Israel and Rafah. And the BBC Verified team have been closely looking at some of the images for us. Here's Merlin Thomas.
The Israeli army has said it's gained operational control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing here. The Israelis say they've done this because mortars were fired from this area, killing 4 of their soldiers. Now, we haven't verified this ourselves, but we have verified several videos circulating on social media of Israeli armoured vehicles, including this one, which appeared online this morning. It shows a tank ramming into 2 Palestinian flags at the crossing on the Gaza side. Now, the long shadows stretching on the ground from the west to the east suggest that this was filmed early in the morning. We've located it to here by looking at pictures of satellite images of the crossing. Now, overnight, there was continuous Israeli bombardment on the border city. Now, we verified this video, which was sent to the BBC by someone in Khan Yunis looking towards Rafah. And you can see some of those flares in the sky. Israel claims 20 Hamas fighters have been killed, but there are also reports of civilian casualties. And Israel says it's warned people of its strikes. One way they say they do this is by dropping leaflets from the sky. And you can see that in this video we verified east of Rafah, and these white specks falling to the ground are those leaflets. And this is what those leaflets look like. And yesterday, Israel directed people in the eastern part of Rafah here to move to what they call humanitarian areas. They've asked people to move from here to here. And the Israeli army have said that this military operation isn't yet the full-scale ground offensive that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said it will carry out. The US has warned against such an offensive because of the dire humanitarian consequences in a city where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled fighting elsewhere in Gaza are still sheltering.
Merlin Thomas there. To South Africa now, where emergency workers are trying to rescue around 50 construction workers. They've become trapped after an apartment building collapsed. At least 5 people are known to have died in the accident. It happened on the coastal city of George. You can see here heavy lifting equipment. Specialist dogs as well have been brought in to try and help with the rescue operation. And our correspondent Shingai Nyoka is there for us.
Well, as you can see, the rescue effort is well and truly underway, and it has been since yesterday, Monday afternoon, when this accident happened, and the rescue workers have been working through the night. You might be able to see behind me, we have diggers that are pulling up some of the scaffolding, because this was very much a construction site. We also have diggers that are trying to bore through the rubble. This was a 5-story apartment building that was being constructed, and they're still trying to dig through that to try to recover some of those workers that are still trapped under there. 50 people so far are unaccounted for. There were 75 people in total that were on the site here, and we heard from sources that rescuers had managed to make contact with some of those people under this this debris. So it's not clear how many are still alive and how many are passed away, but really frantic efforts. Over 100 rescue workers in emergency service, some from as far away as Cape Town, about 400 kilometers away from here, have all come here to try to find these workers. This area has been cordoned off, and so the people are standing quite far away. Families of those workers are at the municipal building, which is just a short distance away from here. They're still hopeful that this rescue mission will yield results and that there will be survivors coming out of here. But there's still a lot of questions about what happened, how an accident like this could happen. Building collapses are very rare in South Africa, and those investigations will continue to find out exactly how this could have happened.
Any developments on that rescue effort will bring them to you. But let's take you back to Moscow, because President Putin has been sworn in for a new 6-year term at a ceremony at the Kremlin. Remember, he's been in power as president or prime minister since 1999. He made an address and was unapologetic about invading Ukraine. He said he would continue to uphold Russia's interests.
We will overcome this very difficult period, this turning point period, and we will pursue our long-term plans and priorities. But first of all, we have to save the people of the country. We have to preserve our values and traditions, and particularly protect voluntary, non-state and religious organizations and civil society. The measures we take must be targeted and must be realizable. We will be open to cooperation with all countries who see in Russia a honest partner. We will not refuse or reject any kind of dialogue with the Western world. We are determined to parry aggression and to particularly counter those who are aggressive towards our country.
To a court case now which is causing international concern and distaste. A British woman pleading guilty to being part of a global monkey torture network. 37-year-old Holly Legresley was a participant in a private online group that was paying people in Indonesia to kill and torture baby monkeys on video. Let's speak to our correspondent Rebecca Henschke, who is outside the court. Rebecca, what happened inside court today?
Well, 37-year-old Holly Legresley pleaded guilty to the charges of causing and facilitating the torture of baby monkeys over the internet. This group was exposed by the BBC, and Holly Legresley went by the username The Emulator, where she was in these private Telegram groups with other people from the UK and the US, where they were brainstorming, crowdfunding, and then commissioning people in Indonesia to film themselves torturing baby monkeys. We heard from the prosecution today that Holly Legresley showed a desire to harm vulnerable creatures, and also that she had a hatred towards pregnant women and children. She'll be sentenced at a later date. Now, another British woman also appeared in court today for similar charges, and she chose not to enter a plea, so her hearing will also take place in June, later in June.
Rebecca, thank you. The actor and disability rights campaigner Liz Carr has produced a new documentary for the BBC on the debate surrounding assisted dying. Her view is that any moves to change the law will leave vulnerable people, including those with disabilities, at much greater risk. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has this report.
Liz Carr's acting career took off relatively late in life. But away from the red carpets and award-winning roles, she's long been an ardent campaigner for disability rights. And it's the prospect of changes to the law around assisted dying that is the focus of her BBC documentary. Her opposition is based on concerns about what it may mean, not just for those suffering from a terminal illness, but also for those who are vulnerable, including people living with disabilities.
If you think this is just about terminal illness, think again. This is about disability. And for me and others, that is terrifying. These laws, I believe, will put lives like mine, marginalised lives, at risk. And those risks will be fatal.
Her documentary sees her take on some of those who've been pushing for a change in the law, including the former Lord Chancellor, Charles Faulkner.
We have to do something about the law, because if you want to take your own life because you are terminally ill, you've either got to do it yourself without any help, or you've got to go to Switzerland, do it earlier than you might otherwise have to. And I am very in favour of changing the law to allow people who are terminally ill to be assisted by a doctor to take their own life, but only subject to safeguards, because for disabled people, one needs very much to ensure that there are appropriate safeguards.
Liz Carr travels to Canada, one country where the law on assisted dying has already been changed to allow those with a terminal illness to end their own life. But the law has also since been expanded to take in those with long-term conditions, but who may not have what the legislation calls a reasonably foreseeable death. That's led to Canada having some of the highest rates of euthanasia in the world, more than 13,000 deaths in 2022. And it's that kind of development that worries those in the UK who are against any change to the law.
So I think the big concern for me is safety. It's ensuring that those who are perhaps more vulnerable in our society to being coerced into an assisted death are protected from that. A classic example would be talking with someone about going to a care home. Patients will say to me, well, I don't want to go to a care home, really, but I know my family want me to do it, and I know it will be easier for them, so I think I'm going to say yes. Now, that example doesn't intrinsically worry us, but substitute the words go to a care home with have an assisted death, and I think it's a completely different picture.
But Liz also meets others who are living with disabilities but who do want the law on assisted dying changed to allow them to have a choice on whether to end their life, should it come to that.
Hello, Liz.
Thanks for this.
Come on in. I'm so sorry about the weather. Come on in.
When she was in her 50s, Melanie Reid had an accident while horse riding and says she wants to control her future.
I have a human right to decide what happens to my body. And I rather sort of resent the fact that it is almost like one small group imposing its values upon a larger group.
Well, I would see the small group as those wanting medically assisted suicide. There's two lines here. For some people, if they ever got in that position, it acts as an insurance policy. It's helpful to know it's there in case. And many people won't even use it, but they want to know it's a possibility. And then there's another group of people for whom the fact that it's a possibility is frightening.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed how vulnerable those living with disabilities and the elderly can be. New laws on assisted dying are being debated on the Isle of Man, and the government in Jersey is considering a change. There are still very real concerns about what this all means and the consequences that could follow. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
And Liz's documentary, Better Off Dead, will air next Tuesday in the UK at 9 p.m. on BBC One. You can also find it as well on the iPlayer. We've been focusing over the past few weeks very much on these protests that are taking place at US universities on campus, particularly the ones in Los Angeles and in New York. We have some live pictures coming to us right now from the University of Chicago, where you can see pro-Palestinian protesters there. There are police on the scene at the moment too. Things do look reasonably calm, but what we've actually seen at these universities is the protesters calling on the administrators to divest from entities that they say benefit or support from Israel's war in Gaza. And we've seen many hundreds of young students arrested on campus over the past few weeks as well. So this is one of the latest protests that is taking place that's happening in Chicago at the University of Chicago at the moment. It's really compromised some students' education. Many have had to stay at home, although some graduation ceremonies did actually happen over the weekend. But this one at the moment seems reasonably calm, but we are closely watching it too at the University of Chicago. And this is something that has now been echoed at some universities across Europe as well. We can show you now Freie University. This is in Berlin. You can see signs being held up there about Free Palestine as pro-Palestinian protesters gather there at the university too. So sit-ins, and you can see the tents, people sleeping overnight at university campuses in Germany. Here in the UK it's happening as well, but these protesters say they're against Germany's support of Israel in terms of its military assault on Gaza. And like their American counterparts, they are also demanding an end to the funding in research institutions and universities that comes from Israel as well. So a little bit of, well, a small bit of action coming to us from Freie University, someone being taken away there by the police. But on the whole, it still looks reasonably calm there too. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Personal information about serving members of the UK Armed Forces has been accessed from a system used by the Ministry of Defence. Government officials told the BBC that China was most likely responsible. We were talking about this with Gordon Carrera a little earlier. We have just had this from the Prime Minister's official spokesperson, who has said the government is reviewing the operations of a third-party contractor whose systems were hacked in the cyber attack on the Ministry of Defence. He said in relation to the specific contractor involved in this incident, a security review of that contractor's operations is underway. Appropriate steps will be taken after that. Downing Street did decline to attribute the reported cyber attack to a specific state or actor and asked whether China was responsible for the attack. The Prime Minister's spokesperson said the Defence Secretary is going to give an update to Parliament this afternoon. You'll appreciate I'm obviously limited in what I can say until then, other than that the MOD has already taken immediate action, isolating the network and supporting personnel affected. I can't get into any further speculation around the origins of the attack, so we will listen in to that statement from the Minister of Defence a little later. Let's talk about frocks now. Fashion's biggest night. The Met Gala has been hosting an array of stars from film, music and TV. A-listers were invited to branch out with the dress code, as they always are. The Garden of Time was the theme, inspired by a short story of J.G. Ballard. Zendaya, J-Lo, Chris Hemsworth, Bad Bunny joined Vogue's Anna Wintour as the hosts. Let's speak to Hannah Skelly, who is a fashion writer and stylist for The Times, who has been covering the star-studded event. Lovely to see you, Hannah. This must be one of your favourite nights of the year, I imagine.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a huge night. It's a really big date in the red carpet calendar, and it's a fantastic night of fashion, basically.
What did you make of this year's frocks? What were your favourites, Hannah?
My favourites, I really loved Pamela Anderson. It was her first Met Gala appearance. She was wearing Oscar de la Renta and she paired it with lab-grown diamonds from high street brand Pandora, which I thought was quite fun. I also really liked Adwoa Aboa's high street co-award from H&M. That was really fabulous. She had a bump out wearing that on the red carpet, so that was quite a moment as well.
Did we have any stars and British designers?
Plenty of British designers on the red carpet as well. British Vogue's editor Chioma Nyadi, she was wearing Burberry, as was Naomi Campbell. Kendall Jenner, she wore a Givenchy gown, which was actually created by Alexander McQueen when he was there in the 90s. So plenty of British representation on the red carpet. Yeah, really good.
What did you think of Cardi B's incredible dress?
So that was quite interesting. That was created by a new gen designer called Window Sen. It's sort of an emerging brand, and his designs, they're sort of club wear meets couture, which is quite fun. So it was great of her to pick such a small designer that's sort of up and coming.
And we've got to the point, Hannah, that I feel I should mention the men because they were there. Did any of them stand out?
Yes, I loved Andrew Scott and Jude Law in their Versace. They looked absolutely fantastic. You can't go wrong with black. They looked really fabulous. I thought they looked great.
There was an issue actually around this awards when it comes to things going viral online that are not true, and particularly Katy Perry and Rihanna, who even Katy Perry's mum said that she fell for it. These viral pictures, they weren't actually there.
They were really convincing, these AI generated images that are circling on X at the moment, formerly Twitter. One of them has over 30 million views already of Katy Perry. So apparently her mum was convinced that she'd actually attended, but Katy had to confirm that she hadn't. It's quite scary, actually, these images coming out. We've not really seen that before, I don't think.
We've got a few images of people who are barely wearing anything, which for maybe our slightly sensitive viewers, they might not want to take too close a look at. Why are these images that are being beamed around the world, and it's one of the most read stories on the BBC News website today as well, Hannah, why is the Met Ball so important to the fashion industry?
Well, it's such a unique event. It's not about trends, and it's not about what you'll find on the high street. And a lot of it is not wearable at all, but it's more about craftsmanship. For instance, Gigi Hadid's gown, that had 2.5 million beads on it, and actually had 70 people working on it to create the design. And it's about celebrating a mix of music, art and fashion, this melting pot of creativity. And in that sense, it's really special. And designers can really show off amazing work that they've spent hours producing.
I've absolutely loved looking at the various galleries around of the frocks today. Hannah, lovely to have you with us. Thank you. Do log on to the BBC News website as well. We've got all the frocks there for you and some of the men in their suits too. Now for some architecture. The late 1940s saw the rise of tropical modernism. It's a style of architecture that took the simple functional design of modernism and adapted it into cool, comfortable buildings for hot and humid climates. As the world considers how to build more sustainably, there is growing interest in this climate-responsive design. Ejioma Njoyakwe went to the Tropical Modernism exhibition at London's V&A Museum to find out more.
Painted concrete, adjustable slats and brise soleil, a few of the features that characterise tropical modernism. Developed from the late 1940s by British architects Jane Drew and Maxwell Fry, it took the simple look and functional design of modernism, but it was adapted to control the environment, providing inbuilt cooling. Christopher Turner curated this exhibition about tropical modernism at London's Victoria and Albert Museum.
I think we have really important lessons to learn from tropical modernism about how to work with rather than against climate when we build. And a lot of contemporary architects are interested in this history, interested in histories of alternative modernism, but also in the way that these buildings use science to create buildings that were comfortable.
Although tropical modernism was pioneered by British architects Jane Drew and Maxwell Fry during British colonial rule, it was championed as a symbol of modernity by Ghana's first Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah, even after the country's independence. This film takes a look at how Ghana's first president Kwame Nkrumah used tropical modernism as a symbol.
Nkrumah saw the potential of architecture to unite a country, but also to propel it into its kind of future and to kind of acclaim its arrival on a global political stage.
Courage Podo studied architecture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in the city of Kumasi.
The campus is one of the most striking examples of tropical modernist architecture. He sees a future where the colonial import is blended with Ghana's traditional way of building.
As much as I reference them for their technical prowess in mitigating climate and adapting to the climate and performing very functionally, I still think they fall short when it comes to the cultural side of architecture and how that relates to the way people use buildings locally in Ghana.
The climate crisis highlights the relevance of tropical modernism, a style of architecture that responds to the environment. Some say it could provide a foundation for how to address rising temperatures, which a new generation of African architects can build on. Ijoma Ndukwe, BBC News, London.
We have some breaking news to bring you now from Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence says it has foiled a Russian plot to assassinate President Zelensky, and it has arrested 2 colonels from the government protection unit suspected of passing on secret information to an FSB cell. It says the plot involved recruiting military officers who would take Mr. Zelensky hostage and then murder him. Targets also apparently included the high-profile military intelligence chief Budanov, who was supposed to have been killed in a missile strike. These assassinations, according to the statement, were to be timed for President Putin's inauguration, which we know happened just a few hours ago. We're looking into this story for you, and we'll bring you more from Ukraine shortly here on BBC News.
Hello there. Finally, a spell of settled weather, not just for the next few days, but in fact for much of this upcoming week into the weekend, in fact. And the best of the sunshine will always be for England and Wales. We will have weather fronts just grazing the northwest of the country at times to bring a little bit of rain, more cloud here. But it will be quite warm in the sunshine for all of us, but certainly for England and Wales. This is the high pressure starting to build in today across the country. We've still got this weak weather front across the north of the UK that will generate quite a lot of cloud for Scotland. Early sunshine across Northern Ireland will tend to fade as well. And we'll see patchy cloud for northern and western parts of England and Wales. A few showers likely to develop here, but nothing as heavy or as widespread as what we've seen over the last few days. Best of the sunshine in towards the southeast, where we could be up to 20 degrees or so. But for most, it's the mid to high teens. Now, through this evening overnight, it looks like any showers will fade away. Most places will be dry, some clear spells, but some sea fog lapping coasts of both North Sea and Irish Sea. And there will be variable cloud here and there. Temperatures generally 6 to 10 Celsius. So I think on the mild side for most. Now into Wednesday, this area of high pressure will promise to bring a dry day for much of the country, but we do see these weather fronts, tighter isobars pushing into the northwest of the country. So the wind will start to pick up across Scotland, Northern Ireland, clouds building too, and then we'll start to see splashes of rain moving in mainly to the north and west of Scotland. But southern Scotland, eastern parts of Northern Ireland should tend to stay dry. The best of the sunshine again for England and Wales with light southerly winds. It's going to feel even warmer, the low 20s for many of us, even up to 20 degrees there. Across southeast Scotland. On Thursday, similar story, more cloud generally, Scotland, Northern Ireland, a few splashes of rain in the northwest of Scotland where it will be breezier, lighter winds further south, and for the bulk of England and Wales, it should be mostly dry, barely a shower around, lots of sunshine and feeling that bit warmer, 22, maybe 23 degrees in the warmest spot. High teens, even where we have the cloud across Scotland and Northern Ireland. We hold on to high pressure for Friday and indeed the weekend, though it starts to retreat out towards the east and low pressure will begin to push into the west of the country later on Sunday and certainly into next week. It looks more unsettled, but a fine end to the week to come. Just the chance of a few showers across western areas, I think, later on Sunday. Take care.
For now, it's a defensive position and can only be activated if the militia attack.
They are proud of their democracy, but they also fear it's now under threat from China like never before.
Every time the government drops tear gas, people disperse, but the farmers come back.
When you're this close to the river, which is a front line, you are always watched, so you have to move quickly.
There when the story breaks. BBC News. Follow on the app.
What does it take to become a top opera star like tenor Jonas Kaufmann,
Welsh bass baritone Sabryn Terfel,
and Greek-American soprano Maria Callas?
I'm on a mission to find out how opera is trying to attract new audiences and reinvent itself.
I think music has the power to change the world.
Take Me to the Opera. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Today at 1, more talks on a ceasefire in Gaza. So far, Hamas has accepted the proposals for a truce, but Israel has not. It comes as new footage from the Israeli army shows it is now in control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing, a vital entry point for aid. Also this lunchtime, China is suspected of hacking a payroll system for the British Armed Forces. Vladimir Putin sworn in for another 6-year term as president of Russia. A fresh wave of strikes hits rail services as the train drivers' union ASLEF takes more industrial action. And why did England's biggest lake go green? We'll have a special report.
And coming up on BBC.
Good afternoon. We'll have the very latest from the Middle East in just a moment. But first, the UK government suspects China was behind the hack of an armed forces payroll system. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, will make a statement to Parliament later about the hack of personal information about Royal Navy, Army and Air Force personnel. China has dismissed the accusations that it was responsible as absurd. Well, let's talk straight away to our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, who is here with me now. And Gordon, the finger of suspicion firmly pointing at China at the moment.
That's right. Members of the armed forces this morning will have received a pretty unwelcome email saying that their personal data has been breached and could have been compromised, talking about names, potentially bank details and addresses. This all relates to information from the payment contractor rather than the Ministry of Defence's own computer systems being breached. Not yet clear what's been done with that data, how much has actually been stolen, but certainly the hackers got into that system and had the potential to access it. Now, who were those hackers? Well, the investigation is still in the early stages. It's only been going on for a few days effectively, but the suspicion is that it is China. Now, we may not hear that officially from Grant Shapps and from ministers today, because normally the process of working out who to blame for this kind of cyber attack can take months, even years, to be sure about it enough to make that kind of accusation. But I think the suspicion is certainly there. That's not being denied, partly because it fits into a pattern of Chinese activity we've seen in the past, where they kind of go after these kind of data sets as part of their espionage campaign. But China has certainly denied it today. Their foreign ministry in a press conference said that this was a smear and malicious, and they're not involved in any cyber attacks.
All right, Gordon, thank you very much. Gordon Carrera. Ukraine says it has foiled a Russian plot to assassinate President Zelensky. It has detained 2 security officials suspected of passing on secret information to the Russian security agency, the FSB. Let's go to our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse. James, bring us up to date. What more details are there?
Well, Ben, ever since the full-scale invasion, assassination plots against President Zelensky have been fairly common. But this is an alleged plot which really does stand out. You have the country's intelligence service claiming that 2 serving colonels in Ukraine's security service, it's the body which is responsible for keeping officials and institutions safe, they allege that 2 serving colonels were hired as moles by Moscow before the full-scale invasion, and their plan was to leak details about President Zelensky's movements, his close security, as well as other top officials, to report those back to Moscow. And then the alleged plan was then for the buildings where they stayed or lived in to be struck by missiles and drones. And the detail just keeps coming. They talked about these colonels moving drones, mines and explosives from the Ukrainian regions which they were working in to Kyiv in order to carry out this plot. Now, we don't know how close